On the morning of September 27, 1969, a Saturday morning, two young boys were cutting through a field by the rail yards in Lowell on Maple Street, on their way to catch some frogs. While walking across the field, they spotted a young boy. He was bound hand and foot, rope around the neck, face down. They ran and got the police. Police showed up. It was the body of John McCabe, 15 years old. Last seen in Tewksbury. His father and mother had been out looking for him the night before. They had him as a missing person. His father identified his body at the funeral parlor where they did the autopsy. This trial is about how John McCabe reached that place. And the evidence will show based upon jealousy. Jealousy by Walter Shelley, because supposedly John McCabe was flirting with his 13-year-old girlfriend, Martha Sharon. So a plan was hatched. Shelley and his best friend, Michael Ferrara, the defendant, were going to teach him a lesson. No one knew what the lesson was until the final arresting of John. John McCabe had been picked up going to a dance at the Knights of Columbus Friday night at 6. He had been picked up by Michael Ferrara and Nancy Davis, his now wife. They drove him from just in front of the novitiate on Chandler Street in Tewksbury up to Main Street, Street 38, and dropped him off there. John subsequently thumbed down with the Knights of Columbus, picked up by others, and was at the dance. And he danced all night. He danced with a young lady named Carol Henry Creeds. He socialized with other people there. His shirt, tie, slacks, sport coat. And at the end of the dance, he used to go home. Now, there's a place right up the street from the Knights of Columbus called Joe's. Joe's was a bar, a restaurant, and they had a takeout where teenagers go in, pick up a sandwich or something, and leave. You'll hear from David Beek. David Beek was in there with his sister getting a sandwich. Looked out the window and saw John coming in the direction of Chandler Street. Just by the phone booth in front of the office, and you'll see a picture. Now, why is that important? Because Edward Allen Brown was the third person in the plot. Edward Allen Brown did not know the lesson to teach John McCabe until he got in the car. Did not know what the lesson was to be. All he knew is they were looking for John McCabe to teach him a lesson. They had picked up Alan Brown at his home and came up Shawshene Street, which is right across from the Oaks. They took a right, go down past the Knights of Columbus, turned around and were coming back up Main Street, Street 38. They saw John McCabe coming just past the Oaks. Shelley pulled the car up, 65 Chevy Impala, maroon in color. Michael Ferrara opened the door, hopped out, grabbed John in the bear hug, pushed him in the back seat of the car. It was a two-door car. Alan Brown pushed the seat forward. John McCabe was now sitting behind Michael Ferrara. Wanting to get out. Let me out. Where are we going? What are we doing? Edward Brown, Alan Edward Brown, describes it as fear in his voice. Ferrara gets on his knees, turns around, tries to start slapping John McCabe. John's got his hands up, blocking it. Brown says he tells him to stop it. Ferrara stops it, turns it around. Where are we going? Just relax, we're going to have a few beers. They drive. According to Brown, destination unknown. not even certain on back streets. They wind up on Moore Street. You'll drive down Moore Street, and there's a store that used to be there called Cunningham's, right on the corner. Then they take a left onto Gorham Street, commonly referred to as Spaghettiville Bridge. There's a railroad tracks that go over Gorham Street. We take an immediate right on Maple Street, then an immediate right into a dirt path road that goes up to the railroad tower. Deserted, no buildings except the railroad tower settled on the hill. They take a cutoff off that dirt road to come to a stop, right next to an old foundation. Shelley gets out on the driver's side, comes around the passenger side, they open the door, seat gets pushed forward, they're pulling John McCabe out, Brown is pushing on. They're outside the car. They take him a short distance from the car and we're walking here. They wrestle him to the ground. They call for help. Brown comes over to help. He sits on the buttocks, upper thighs of John McCabe facing backwards. Walter Shelley is sitting with his back to him on his lower back, holding his hands down. At this point, John McCabe is screaming, yelling, "Let me out, let me go." Fear. Alan Brown says he hears the voices, then he hears muffled. And you'll find out that John McCabe's mouth is very shut. Brown says that Ferrara took rope, knife, cut a piece of rope, and bound his ankles together. Then went around and bound his wrists together. Then they got off. Ferrara put a rope around the neck down to the legs, bending his knees up, so his knees were almost straight up in the bottom of his feet, with the rope to his neck. And they're taunting him. That's what you get for messing with Molly. Stay away from Molly. And as they walk away, Walter Brown sees John struggling and moaning, trying to move. They get in the car and they drive away. They leave him. The only light coming from Maple Street, maybe some cat fought from Gorham Street. In a rocky area, they also take his eyes shut. 15-year-old John McCabe is in total isolation. Brown says he tells them about an hour later, we got to go back. And from the time they picked them up outside the dance, we put them about 11:15. It was probably 20 minutes to 12 before the road that they left them up to the rail yard. They got back sometime an hour and a half later. Brown says when they drove in, same room, into the yard, John McCabe's feet were still up in the air. He didn't get out of the car this time, Ferrara and Shelley did. They went over to the body of John McCabe. Shelley was up by his head, Ferrara down by his lower waist. He couldn't see any other part of John McCabe. They were there for about 30 to 40 seconds, and they come running back to the car at a fast pace. What's going on? Brown said. He's not breathing. Brown is looking straight ahead, and Shelley and Ferrara, they backed out and take off. The two boys go and look at the frogs. Found John McCabe, but this time his legs were down. And he was dead at the scene. Autopsy conducted that day revealed that he died by ligature strangulation, asphyxiation by ligature strangulation. And the police launched an investigation. But it was 1969, ladies and gentlemen. Police wore no footgear. They had no gloves. They were picking up evidence with their bare hands. You'll see the ropes that were used to bind John's hands, feet, and neck. You'll see the pants and shirt he was wearing. You'll see the tape that was over his mouth and eyes. They interviewed dozens and dozens of people living next to the mom. They not tape recorded, shorthand was brought in when they interviewed people. And you'll hear from one of them who interviewed Michael Ferrara early Sunday morning on the 28th, about 2:30 in the morning. He was with his mother. Michael Ferrara was 16 at the time. Where were you last night, Michael? He gave several different versions, several different time sequences, several groups of people he was with, each one different. Lowell Police Detective Detective General St. Peter interviewed him the following night, or later that day in the afternoon. Two different versions. Now this went on for a while. They interviewed others. You'll hear from a woman named Elaine Callahan. There was a maid name back then. She was friends with a kid named Lester Adair. His brother Jerry Adair was also friends with Michael. In October of that year, 69, they decided to go get some beer up the town line, Delaware, New Hampshire, straight up Bridge Street. They go up and get beer, and the conversation is still ongoing about what happened on the tape. Elaine asked Michael, "Are you still bothering you about this case?" He said, "Yeah." And she said, "Why?" She said, "I don't have an alibi." Don't have an alibi. And she turns to the brother, the various opponents, and said, "I wonder who killed John McCabe." And Michael Ferrara says, "I did it." She turns around and looks at him, and he's got this look on his face. Not a smile, not a joke, one that's scared. And she said, like a young girl would, "Stop kidding, Mike." And he said, "Okay," and he smiled. Michael Ferrara went to the funeral at the church. He did that. Actually went to the village, signed in with Walter Shelley and Nancy Cruz and Alan Brown's brother. And they're standing there in church. Michael's got a hold of her hand, gripping it. She looks up at him and he's got tears in his eyes. Now this is a kid, Michael Ferrara, who barely knew John McCabe. He's got tears in his eyes. He's looking, he's staring at a 1,000-yard stare. And he's squeezing so tight, he's pushing a ring into his skin. No explanation. That was the theme of Michael Ferrara going to the gravesite and the funeral. For someone he really knew. The case continued, and it died down. They interviewed a number of people. Kept on coming back to Michael Ferrara and Walter Shelley. In 1999, police got information that Michael Ferrara had told the kid Jack Ward that cookout pig roast in Tewksbury. He went up to Jack Ward, Michael Ferrara did, and said, "I know who killed John McCabe." Said it several times. Jack Ward kind of like brushed him off. Jack Ward was best friends with John McCabe. He comes up to him. Finally, Jack says, "Who?" He said, "Walter Shelley." Why? Molly. Jealous. But Jack Ward went and told Mr. McCabe, he told the police. Michael Ferraro was interviewed by police 7 years later. Detective by the name of Gerald Wayne is now deceased, and Lieutenant Thomas Sullivan of Massachusetts State Police took up the case. They interviewed Michael Ferraro. He told them where he'd been that night. Another version. Everything had a different version, different time, different people he was with. Some nights Marlowe was with him, the night of the 26th. Some nights Marlowe wasn't. He kept on going. He gave him the name of Edward Allen Brown as being the third person who gave him Walter Shelby. Up to that point, Edward Allen Brown had never been interviewed by the police. Never been spoken to, never even heard of. The people had talked about three people in the car. No one knew who the third person was. They brought Mr. Brown in, but they spoke to him the first time. Brown denied any knowledge whatsoever. He lived in his business. His family goes to work, he doesn't. Never knew anything about the murder. Now, Edward Allen Brown was in the Air Force, reserves. He fought wars over Iraq, Afghanistan, Kuwait, Qatar. They finally got him in when he came back the last time in 2007, September. They interviewed him again. Well, it's possible. It may be. Kept on sidestepping away from the crime. In 2011, specifically January, things heated up in the investigation. Linda Cochran, detective from Lowell, was brought in to replace Jerry Wayne, still geared up to Lieutenant Sullivan. They started re-interviewing him, putting people into the grand jury. Jack Ward was interviewed, told statements to what Michael Ferraro had said. Brian Gapp, who was having a cookout, testified, gave statements that Michael was talking to Jack Ward, but he couldn't hear what he said. A man who had come forward earlier in the case, by Moran. Him and his buddies have been up at the top of the rail yard, relieving themselves. They saw a 65 Chevy Impala two-door pull into the area where the body was found. Thinking it was friends of theirs, they were going to go down and scare the daylight out of them. They pulled in at high rate of speed, put on the lights, it wasn't him. He turned around and backed out. Moran can testify that it was a 65 Chevy Impala two-door. He told the police that day it was plum colored. Later on, he said it was champagne colored. But there was a 65 Chevy Impala two-door at that scene. Michael Ferraro was interviewed by Linda Coughlin and Tommy Sullivan again. Came up with another version. They interviewed him up at his house. And they talked to him about, did you say that Walter killed John? He didn't remember being at the pig roast. Except his wife looked at him and said, why didn't you tell me? Why did you say something like that? And he said, look, I don't know what she did. In the conversation. Edward Allen Brown was brought back in February, March, April. Continually denied. Maybe it was a fantasy. Maybe it was a dream. Maybe I don't remember. Maybe I could have. Yet he remembered driving Walter Shelley to the police station at the end. He remembered Michael Ferraro's last words later on As he drove away from the scene after knowing that John was dead, if we keep it to ourselves, we'll be okay. If anyone says anything to anyone, I'll kill you. Michael Ferrara's words. Now, Shelley and Brown was 17 years old. Finally, Edward Allen Brown is in the district attorney's office in Lowell, going over it again. What are you afraid of, Edward? Going to jail for the rest of my life. My family being on the street. I was a man 59, 60 years old now. Retired from the Air Force. Michael Ferrara is 59. Walter Shelley is 60. This happened 43 years ago. Edward Brown was asked, don't you not think that Mr. McCabe is in his 80s and has been waiting for 40 years, would like to know what happened to his son? And Alan Brown started crying, shaking, turning red, and saying, yes, I've got my own children. I would like to know. And he told what happened that night as I related to him. Fully expected to be walking out there in handcuffs under arrest. An agreement was reached with him in exchange for his testimony. Several weeks later, he was indicted, charged with manslaughter. He will not be jail time in exchange for his testimony. But Michael Ferrara gave us his name. Edward Brown gave us the information confirmed by the crime scene. When he was being interviewed. Pictures of John McCabe and his found at the scene, which you will see during the trial. Afraid of going to jail. Ladies and gentlemen, John McCabe was kidnapped off the streets by Shelley Ferrara and Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown was a full participant. When Mr. Brown gave his statement to the police, he had no duty. He had no promise. He fully expected he was going to go down for life. You'll have to judge his credibility. After he was arrested, after everyone else was arrested, he was picked up in domestic violence up in New Hampshire. Pled guilty. He was on probation. His only record of manslaughter. After Ferrara was arrested, brought back to Massachusetts. Walter Shelley was arrested, brought back to Massachusetts. It's one of credibility. Simple as that. You can judge. You make the decision. But I believe, I suggest that later this testimony, later this trial, you will find Mr. Ferrara guilty of first degree murder. First degree murder. They left John McCabe living on the ground, rope around his neck. And you see the furrows in his neck in the autopsy. You see the marks on his hands and his feet. One can only infer that he's struggling with the hair. He was struggling to breathe. The three of them walked away at the top of him. Once that rope went around his neck, what other purpose, I suggest, would rope go around the neck other than an intent to kill? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Mr. Wilson, on behalf of the defendant, would you like to give an opening now?
I would, Your Honor.
Okay, please.